This journey is only the start because it needs to culminate at a point where we give back to our communities. And somebody who's done that effortlessly and with ease is our next speaker. She has inspired, she has led, she has completely changed the face of what I'd like to call women's leadership in this country. Miss Meera Sanyal, thank you for being with us today. Ms. Sanyal was a former board member of AIESEC India, an alumnus of AIESEC India, and now serves as the chairperson of the Urban Development Committee of the Indian Merchant Chamber. She gave up an illustrious career in banking and finance to go into exactly what Anirudh was talking about, public service. Ma'am, we'd be honored to hear from you, so over to you.
Thank you, Anna. And Anirudh, it's a hard act to follow, I have to say. So let me actually start with where the Kabir Cafe left off. And that was to say, I think what they really summed up for us so beautifully is that in the end, we leave it all behind. So when we were young people, we were all focused on the destination. I think when you've reached my stage of life, you begin to realize that it's really all about the journey. And the journey in itself is the destination. So as Anna says, I'm at a crossroads in my journey. After 30 years in banking, I'm now starting, or I have started, on a new journey, which for me started in 2009. And my children, of whom I have two, they said to me, as I was leaving banking and joining politics, they said, how have you managed to choose the two most unpopular professions in the world? And indeed, it's an interesting journey. I'm sure it's not hidden from all of you. As Anna says, of course, one of my more corporate avatars is to be with the Indian Merchant Chamber. But I wear many hats, one of which is that I'm a leader of the Aam Aadmi Party, which in itself is an interesting experience. I'm also on Hillary Clinton's board of Women Business Leader. I'm the president of Jai Hind College. I'm on the boards of various companies, and I'm passionate about what's happening in our city, which I'd love to share with some of you over dinner, because not all of us can join politics, but all of us, as Anirudh says, can be good citizens and can influence what is happening. So when I stand here and I look back at my journey, what I can share with you is that AIESEC certainly shaped my life. In 1981, there were a few of us who tried to start up AIESEC once again. We had tried, apparently people had tried twice or thrice before, but each time AIESEC in India didn't survive. And some of the names that Anna mentioned, Arjun, Bhagat, whom we call Banta, Jagi Bakshi, they were a group in Delhi, some in IIT, some in SRCC, and they reached out to a group of us in Sydenham College, Sudeep is here, and said, will you start up in Mumbai? And those early experiences were very entrepreneurial because we started with nothing. I mean, it literally started in I don't think anyone had garages, but it started in the drawing rooms and the bedrooms of people with really no resources. And I think all of us here really need to acknowledge the tremendous support we received from the House of Tatas, from Mr. Ratan Tata himself, from Mr. Adi Godrej, from Mr. Deepak Parekh. And I'd like you all to give a big round of applause to these early supporters of AIESEC. Without whom we would be stillborn. They were our angels. They were our angel investors. And in those early days, I think I learned my first lessons of management, of time management. I remember going for an exchange, whatever you call international congress. I was the National Committee Exchange Controller. In those days, we didn't have to go through elections. I mean, there were just posts and you just took whatever there was. And we landed up in Manchester. There were about 5 of us. As you can imagine, there was a group of us who was partying, and partying quite hard, and I was sitting there with all of 7 forms. We only had 7 students to exchange and 7 companies. And I don't know how it is now in IC, but we used to get these long printouts which used to come out of the IBM printer. And I was sitting there in this big hall of Congress, completely bewildered. I had no idea what I was supposed to do with this. And sitting across from me was the German stall. And the exchange controller from Germany was a lady called Max, a lovely, lovely person. And there was only 2 of us in the hall. Everyone else was at the party. And she looked at me and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to figure out the exchanges." And she said, "Don't be silly. You only have, less than 10 exchanges." And I said, "Yes." And Germany, AIESEC Germany in those days was, the giant. They had, I think in those days, about 4,000 traineeships to exchange. She said, "Why are you sitting here with only 10? And I said, "I actually have no idea what I'm supposed to do." So she says to me, "Where are your files?" And I looked at her and I said, "Files?" And she said, "You don't have any files?" I said, "No." So she said, "Come here, sit down." And she gave me my first lesson in actually filing things and putting things in order. And once we had done that, and she'd shown me, she said, "All of this is all nonsense. You throw all of this away. You only need to look at these things." It all became so simple. And I recount this because sometimes management is about the simplest things, but we need to learn them. And I was privileged to learn it from a very, very fine master. To this day, when I make hiring decisions, I often ask people to take a sheaf of paper, go out and photocopy it and file it. And I can tell you, it tells you a lot about people when you see how they do these simple things. The other great experience that AIESEC offers, and one which I personally benefited really greatly from, was the actual exchange experience. As Gurin said, it is life-changing. I had short experiences as well. My first exchange traineeship was in Denmark. I worked with a cable manufacturing company. It was called NKT. And it was a very short traineeship, and so they put me to work on a very simple thing. In those days, there was a group of people called the Hunt brothers. Of course, it was much before many of your time. But what they had done was they had cornered the copper stocks of the world. And so copper had shot through the roof. And this being a cable manufacturing company, obviously it was affecting their profits very seriously. So they put me to work on mapping the prices of copper. And as you can imagine, that was about half an hour job, because the copper prices were declared on the London Metal Exchange in the morning. And so you mapped it for that day, and then my work was done. But very interestingly, and this is going back really to the year 1981 and 1980, where they had started a pilot project for optical fibers. And they were the first company in Scandinavia to be manufacturing optical fibers. So since I had a lot of time on my hands, I would spend all my time in the optic fiber plant. And very quickly I realized that this was something magical. It was just completely new technology. And the people who are, my generation will recall that in those days in India, you had to wait several years for a phone. It was like a Bajaj scooter. You applied, and 10 years later, after you had 2 children, you got a phone. So I used to sit there and say, "Look, why don't you come to India?" And these people would look at me and say, "No, we have no intention of coming to India. We are focused on Scandinavia." Well, a few years later, I remember I'd just come back from INSEAD, where I was doing my MBA, and I opened the newspaper. And this was in the year 1984. And I looked at the newspaper, and there, in the middle page spread was a massive announcement saying Hindustan Cables had entered into a joint venture with NKT for the manufacture of optic fiber cables. And it was such a wonderful moment, and to me this epitomizes what an exchange can do. Of course, it's very enriching for the student, but it can also be very enriching for the company, because you bring a freshness of ideas, you bring a new perspective, you bring new markets, you open up an entire new world. Few years later, I worked with Electrolux. And there I actually learned some very interesting things. So I was put to work. My boss was an old India hand. And he said, you girls from India, you never do any work, so you will make coffee. So I was put to work making coffee for the entire executive floor. Of course, this was very interesting because I had never made coffee, so I did learn how to make coffee there. But what was also very fascinating was that a new technology had been introduced, and that was the fax machine. Any of you, please raise your hands. Have you ever seen a fax machine? Oh, well, that's not bad. Okay. Well, it was a magical technology, but also which became obsolete quite fast. At any rate, they had two fax machines, one on the 5th floor, which was the executive floor, and one on the 1st floor. And I spent all my day running up and down. I would, put in a fax on one floor and go pick it up on the other because I didn't have much more work than that. But it was very interesting to see this new technology. At the same year, Ericsson had introduced the GSM technology. And these are technologies which changed our world. And it was interesting to see how they were being applied right at their start in a new market. Finally, they put me to good work, which was to write the international sales manual for the AquaGuard. And that was, also very interesting. But working in an international context, working as part of a global team, learning the dignity of labor was a very, very interesting thing for me. And so I learned about work experience and the knowledge of that. Coming back to India, a very important aspect of management, which I think is inbuilt into the DNA of AIESEC, which a lot of us need to learn, is the art of delegation and succession planning. We all had one-year terms and we all had to move on. And so I remember sitting in a double-decker bus, speaking to a young man who was 1 year younger than me in school and who was then in HR college by the name of Vikram Gandhi. And I wouldn't let him get off the bus until he agreed to join AIESEC because I said, here is someone who is talented and can take over from us. And that's something you learn to do because you know you're only there for a year or two. And so you groom talent. And you take pleasure in their success. And they become the people who take the organization to the next level. And I met Vikram just a few weeks ago. We met in Delhi. And we were remarking how, the cycle of life goes all the way around. We both went into banking. He became a very successful investment banker. And now he's creating impact through the Asha Foundation. Entrepreneurship. I think that's a very, very important part of AIESEC. We all become entrepreneurs in some way or the other because that's what we have to do. But Ronnie talked about mentorship. I think we are all privileged to be mentors to younger generations of AIESECers. But more importantly, we have all been mentored by them. After I left AIESEC, I was one of the people to start the AIESEC alumni network and had the privilege of interacting with a lot of young AIESECers. Then I was on the board. And what I found fascinating is how much we learn from you. Because the world is changing so fast, and you look at it, as you say, the new leadership definition. The leaders of the future are those who will learn from the leaders of the future. And if we keep our minds open, then only and only then will we actually be relevant going forward. Finally, as to impact, I think in the end, that's what AIESEC teaches us. It teaches us how these experiences can create an impact on your life and how you can create an impact on someone else's life. In many ways, AIESEC was one of the most formative experiences of my life. And if I could recommend something to every young person, it would be an AIESECer. Let me end here and thank every one of the people who have supported AIESEC all these many years. For me, it has been an incredible privilege to have had the opportunity, literally for 34 years, to be associated with this wonderful organization. Thank you so much.